Hello and welcome back to the studio. Over the past 20 odd years, I've been asked the same questions over and over and over again. The first one, well, I'll let you decide what that is. You can leave a comment down below. But the second most common one is, when do I know a painting is finished? When should I stop? And it's quite easy to carry on a little bit too long sometimes. I think it's a common misconception that because Bob painted everything in one session, that you have to too. So let's see how I get on painting this little painting, and I'll tell you a bit more about it as we go along. So you know the routine. Sit back, relax, cup of tea, and watch me paint this little painting. Oh, and you might even suggest a name for it in the comments down below. Happy painting, people. So here's my canvas, 16 by 12 for a change. My reference is this. It's a pastel I painted some time ago with Graham Cox, and it uses the rule of 3. That is, major items a third apart. So the tree and the sky is all 1/3 apart, and this is 1/3 up from the base approximately. So it leaves a nice open middle third. Now time to paint it in oils. I'm going to be using a Bob Ross 1-inch landscape brush, a Bob Ross fan brush, filler brush, liner brush, and of course a Bob Ross palette knife. I'm going to start off with this, and it's Bob Ross liquid white oil paint. I'll be using Bob Ross paints throughout. I keep it in a small airtight pot for ease of storage and application. I'm going to use my 1-inch brush to apply a thin even coat. Take care though, this is a small canvas I'm using, so I don't need as much as normal. I finish off with some long flat strokes just to even out the surface. And of course I'll do my little fingertip test. Check that you haven't applied too much. If you're not sure, I'll leave a link to a video up here in the corner. Here's my palette. I'm going to be using a basic range of colours here. I'll list them down below in the description. But I think I'm going to be starting off with some phthalo blue. And I'll also be using a little bit of bright red. I'm going to mix up a soft pastel blue colour, titanium white and phthalo blue mixed together. I sometimes go in with the colour straight on my brush, but today I want that soft colour, so I'm going to mix it first. I don't want my sky to be too overpoweringly bright. I'll adjust my colour and then check it against my canvas. I think that's about right. So I'm going to carry on using my 1-inch brush, go into that blue colour. Yes, I know it looks a little bit vibrant, but the liquid white will change that value. I'm going to paint the top 2/3 as sky. I'll start in this top left corner in case my colour's too bright and allow it to fade out roughly at that horizon line where I held my finger. I finish off with some long flat strokes just to even out the surface a little more. Next I'll mix a soft pink colour. I want this just above the horizon line and just behind the distant hills. I'll use titanium white and a little bit of bright red. I had some alizarin crimson in mind for this, but I didn't use it in the end. I'm going to carry on using that 1-inch brush. A little bit of blue and some soft pink will make a soft purple tone. Just a hint. I'll adjust my colours as I apply them to the canvas, so I let them overlap slightly and blend them with some little crisscross strokes. I don't want a hard line. As you see, my colour was a little bit too pale. That's better. A little bit more red is what I need. I encourage you to stand back from your paintings regularly when you're painting so you can see the colours you're truly mixing and using. I'll clean my brush off in this lower section just to tone it down a bit. I'm going to mix a stronger lavender colour for a shadow for my clouds, so I'm using more of the blue and more of the red tones. I'm using a filler brush for this, and I'll sketch the position of the shadow for the clouds first. Remember, it's about 1/3 down from the top of the canvas and at a slight angle. Now, use the filler brush and just scrub in some colour. You don't have to be too careful with this. We'll be putting some highlights above it and blending them together. Just look for a nice random shape. with a flattish base. Next, I'll load my fan brush with a good amount of titanium white paint. Now, just above that shadow line, lay your brush at an angle on a corner, and you want to make little C shapes, little letter C's. C for cloud. Remember, you just want to squeeze the paint onto the canvas above the shadow line. Blend them together gently. Notice I haven't reloaded my brush. I just let the colour run out, and then I go back in with my 1-inch brush, and very gently, with just the corner of the 1-inch brush, I tap into some of that lovely bright highlight colour and just take the colour down into the shadow colour. Don't lose all this lovely detail. It's so tempting to overwork it. Know when to stop. Let's add another little bit of cloud here. I'll sit back and decide if I like the shape of them or whether they need a little bit more work. But take your time with it. I think my clouds need a bit more volume, so I've added a bit to the top of them, and again you see I'm just dib-dabbing the colour on. Save all the lovely detail. Let's turn our attention to this distant hill. Nothing too big, about a third the way up from the base of the canvas. I'm going to use my filbert brush to just do a very light sketch. That's about a third up, and I want to position the peak of this hill not too central. No, it's a little bit further to the right. And I think that looks a little better there. Now, some of this is going to be covered by the foreground trees, so I'm looking for the position of these other areas as well, and I'll just sketch those in. Notice this painting has a sort of a diamond shape in the centre. The sketch I'm doing is very, very loose, so you don't have to be too accurate with things. Just make sure things fall roughly in the right place. For this part of my painting, I need to do a green underpainting. I'm going to take some sap green, a little phthalo blue, and mix them together well. I'm also going to darken the colour with a little bit of black. I want a deep bottle green colour for this area. Now, back to my 1-inch brush. I'm just going to push my brush into that dark green colour. Notice I load just one side of my brush. Now, lay your brush at an angle and tap gently. I want to leave a little texture on the canvas. It'll make highlighting so much easier. Now, this is the light side of my hill. On the right side, it's in deep shadow. So I load my brush a little more heavily, but with the same colour. And again, just a tapping action here, just to add some texture to the painting. I like that sort of a curve there, so I'll drop that in. Now, back into that pale lavender colour we made earlier on for the clouds. I just scooped it all together, but I'm going to add a suggestion of a little highlight. Just tap it over that green colour, just to lighten the area slightly. Let's change that sharp edge, put a few little bits and pieces into it. Again, just small changes in detail. I want to add a little tree line here, so you can see I've tipped my brush on its corner and I'm using that same dark green colour. Now, let's take a little bit of this pale blue colour and lightly add a shadow to the right hand side. It's just a small detail, just to sort of show that there is some light bouncing across the right hand side of this hill. I'll use my palette knife this time, but I could have easily used my brush. I'm going to add a few little dark dots here and there just to indicate maybe some trees or bushes in the distance. Let's look at my original pastel again. Not bad. I don't have to be exactly right, but it's more inspiration. Let's carry on working in these sections next. I'm going back to my original dark green colour here, and just tapping in this little bit of a meadow or a field. This may not be an exact match for the original colour, but it'll be okay. Now, here's a mistake. I'm going to try using Indian yellow for a highlight. I load my brush well. Notice how I push it forwards into the paint to make a little ridge, and nothing much happens with the highlighting. This is a common mistake. You have to remember that some colours, like Indian yellow, are transparent, and when you put them over a dark colour, well, they just simply disappear. Adding a touch of an opaque colour like white or yellow ochre makes all the difference. Don't forget, I'm still adding texture at this stage, so don't fill it in completely. Now, I want to mix up a new underpainting colour, dark sienna with a little black. This is for the yellow fields, maybe of wheat. And as you see, in the blink of an eye, I've made the colour I want. But, whoops, I nearly made a mistake and I got ahead of myself. I forgot there's a tree line. I'm going to use my filbert brush and go into that dark green colour that we made for the background hills. Press the brush into that paint and then use little upward pushing strokes, little sort of stabbing actions here, just to indicate a small hedgerow. Don't get ahead of yourself when you're painting. It's easy to run out of position. Here you see my painting a little bit closer. I'm just looking for the suggestion of a hedge, so no big detail here, just press it in. Now, back to my dark brown colour, dark sienna and black. Same brush, 1-inch brush, I dry cleaned it well. And again, I load just one side again. I press into that paint to get a little bit of paint on the edge of the brush. And once again, I add some texture. Using a dark underpainting colour, dabbed on like this, gives the next layer of paint something to grip to. We'll see in a minute how we can come unstuck with that though. As I said, I dry clean between each application so that my brush stays in good condition. But even so, my brush can become clogged. I'm going to go into some titanium white, a little yellow ochre and a little Indian yellow colour. Pull it out and then press my brush into the paint. Notice how I get that little line of colour just above the bristles. That means I've got the same little bright edge on my brush. Now, drop the brush handle down at an angle and gently tap. This colour should stick easily to the dark brown colour, which is a little bit firmer and drier. I build up layers of colour as I go, following the lay of the land. Now, let's move down and add another layer of trees and bushes to about here. I'll use the same technique as before with the other little hedgerow. I plan the position by putting on just a few little dabs of colour here and there, and then just press the brush into the canvas. It's a little stabbing action, but it leaves again texture. You'll hear me use that word a lot in a painting, I'm afraid. Now I'll add the next layer of land. And of course more highlights. It's the same 1-inch brush I'm using over and over and over again, dry cleaning as I go. Now let's see if we can get some colour in the foreground. And I'm just starting to struggle a little bit. My paintbrush is becoming a little clogged and you can see that my brush strokes are becoming a little more laboured. I have to work a little harder and I'm getting into trouble. I can feel my brush sticking to the canvas and my highlights aren't really coming off very well. But I press on. Let's add another little hedgerow and more highlights. I've lost that brightness that I was hoping for. I'm afraid I've overworked my painting a little bit too much. It's time to take a break from my painting. I'll set my watch. So you saw from that last little sequence, I managed to stop painting just in time, and that's something I'm going to encourage you all to do. The Bob Ross technique is wonderful and you have so much fun, but you almost don't know when to stop. Learning when to stop is key. It's too easy to carry on overpainting things. I've left my painting to sit overnight. It's just started to stiffen slightly, so I can carry on re-highlighting without mixing yet more mud. I'll add those big trees and maybe make some more subtle adjustments. So, on with the painting. Time for more tea. Let's look at our reference picture again. I'm sort of pleased enough with the background. I think this distant field is okay in green, but yes, it's this area in the foreground here that I want to be a bit more sort of bright and sparkly. So let's mix up a colour. I'm using white with a little bit of Indian yellow and a touch of ochre. I compare it to my painting on my palette knife. I think I'm just about right. Now, freshly cleaned brush. Let's go back and re-highlight. Tip the brush down at a slight angle and just touch the canvas. Remember, the paint underneath is still tacky and it takes this new colour without blending too much. But it's still possible to overpaint it. Let's add some of this new highlight colour to this part of my painting as well. Now I've got that bright colour back that I really wanted all along. But I leave some of the shadows in place. It's easy to just overpaint at this stage again. Now let's think about the position of these trees. Remember, about a third in from the right hand side on the big tree and about a third in from the left with the little trees. I use my palette knife and I take a little bit of that dark green colour and I just scratch the canvas here. Just drag it down the painting to leave an indication of where you want that tree trunk to be. I'll make it a bit more obvious for you. There. And I'll do the same for the trees on the left. Again, press and pull. Just leave a little suggestion of a tree trunk. It's not so much paint that if you really wanted to, you couldn't just blend that out again. It's a nice way of planning your painting in advance. I'm going to add some dark sienna into my green colour that I made for the background hills. I want an olive green colour for my big tree. I don't use the same green colour all the way through my paintings. It can all look a bit too samey. I'm using my filbert brush again and I'm just taking a small amount of paint and just outlining where I think the tree should be. Fairly faint at this stage. Now I'm happy with the shape of things. I'll go back in with that same colour and darken it up. You notice I didn't go and get a new green colour. I made the colour with what I had on my palette. Let's add a tree trunk. I've got a little bit of black and dark sienna again. And with the small blade of my knife, I just touch in the detail of the trunk. I'll grow it a little wider once I got the centre line in. And a little bit to these trees as well. And maybe the odd branch here and there in the main part of the tree. I mentioned this painting was inspired by Graham Cox, a wonderful pastel artist I was privileged to paint along with at his workshops in Wiltshire. I'll drop a link to his YouTube channel in the description down below. Let's add a little highlight to my tree trunk. I'm going to use some of my field colour, my lovely golden colour, with a little dark sienna and maybe a little bit of yellow ochre. Just gently mix them. It's something called a marble mix. And I'll take just a little tiny roll of this on the edge of my knife and just touch it to the tree trunk. Remember, everything's on a small scale here, so you need to be very delicate with this. Nothing too big and bold at this stage. Just tap it on, leave a little texture. Let's add some highlights to this big tree. This colour here, with a little bit of sap green, should make me a lovely sort of acid green colour. I want a bright yellow green colour for my tree. That looks about right. Notice how I push my brush into the paint to load the edge of the brush with just a little highlighting colour. The light is coming from the left, so that's the side I want to be highlighting most. And I just use a little pressing action, just a little flick of the corner of the brush to sprinkle a few highlights across the side of my tree. Keep in mind where the highlights will be and where you need to retain some of the shadows. Think about painting one branch at a time. Do a section and move on to the next section. Save a little shadow here and there. If you enjoy watching my videos and you learn something, then consider subscribing. You can also give this painting a little thumbs up, that's a like, and leave a comment. Let me know what you want me to paint for you next. If you want to go a bit further, you can even leave a small donation in my coffee jar. I'll use it to buy some more paint. Thank you. My painting's coming on nicely, and I'll add just a small amount of highlighting to these little bushes. Again, I try and vary my colours a little bit. I'm using a slightly darker green tone for this so it doesn't sort of clash too much with all the other greens in my painting. Just remember, don't overdo it. Like I said, don't overdo it. Oh, I've done it again, haven't I? I should have stopped painting a little earlier. So, let's make amends. I'm going to use my filbert brush with a little bit of the dark green colour and just go back in here and push in a little bit more of that shadow colour again. You can do a couple of repairs at this stage without mixing too much mud, but remember, if it becomes too muddy, just stop, take a break, leave your painting alone for a day or so and come back and re-highlight. I think a final detail here, I need something else. In Graham's painting he had a little fence post or two. Just a small touch, but it's enough to take your eye to the centre of the painting. I'm going to use a liner brush just to add a few more little sticks and twigs to my tree. These final touches will bring my painting all together. Don't rush this stage, because people love to see the detail in your work. Add a little, stand back, then go back and add a little more. A delightful beginner's painting that will teach you when to stop. A question I'm asked second most to the other one, which was of course... So there you have it, a sweet little painting that any beginner should be happy to tackle, but even more experienced painters should be aware of. It has some pitfalls, but don't move, there's another little video coming right along now. Happy painting!